The Tupolev-144 is the pride of Soviet aviation. The plane was a product of the Tupolev Design Bureau, headed by Alexander Tupolev. It would serve a lengthy career lasting from 1977 to 1999, where it would serve a total of 55 passenger flights. However, before we delve deep into that information, we have to start all the way from the beginning. In January 1962, the Soviet government published the concept of the Tupolev-144 in an issue of the magazine called Technology of Air Transport. The Air Ministry began developing the Tupolev-144 on July 26, 1963, and it would be approved by the Council of Ministers just 10 days later. The first prototype of the Tupolev-144 had its first ever flight on December 31, 1968 near Moscow, Russia, and a year later it would go supersonic, becoming the first ever airliner to do so. Meanwhile, the French were building their own supersonic airliner called the Concorde. Despite looking similar, the Tupolev-144 was extremely different from the Concorde, as it was bigger and faster. In fact, it was so fast that it needed a parachute to stop itself when landing. The Concorde also used an electronic engine package, which the Tupolev-144 wasn't permitted to purchase. Finally, the biggest difference between the Tupolev-144 and the Concorde was that the Tupolev-144 lacked Concorde's conical camber. Instead, it had a double delta wing and retracted double-slotted flaps to increase lift at low speeds. The engines which the Tupolev-144 used were called the Kolosov RD-3651As. It took a long time for these to meet specific fuel consumption requirements. Also, the Tupolev-144 used maximum afterburner for takeoffs and minimum afterburner for cruise. It first went into service on December 26, 1975 as a cargo plane carrying mail and freight. However, all of this was just to prepare for its soon-to-be passenger service. 2 years later, in 1977, passenger service began, with only one airline putting it in its fleet called Aeroflot. During its passenger service, it proved to be extremely unreliable, with it having many flaws. First of all, it was very unsafe, with the most common failures being decompressions of the cabin and the engine exhaust duct overheating. In fact, it was an accident which actually killed 2 crew members that ended its career flying passengers. Another reason for its failure was because of its limited routes. For those who don't know, only one commercial route, which was Moscow to Alma-Ata, was ever used for this aircraft. Although it could fly longer distances, Soviet decision-makers had little confidence in this plane, preventing the plane from pursuing more destinations. And finally, when passengers flew on this plane, they were basically trapped in an air rape chamber for a few hours, as the sound from the engines and air conditioning was loud as hell. In fact, the sound always measured up to at least 90 to 95 decibels. After ending passenger service in 1978, all Tupolev-144s were temporarily used as airborne laboratories until a wealthy businesswoman named Judith DePaul would use one as a test plane for her program, which was intended to design the next supersonic airliner. This program lasted for 4 years and would prove to be unsuccessful at the end. Therefore, all Tupolev-144 would officially retire in 1999. Now, although this isn't the most successful aircraft to ever exist, it is still one of the most remembered, with many Soviets putting it in their museums. Yes, it had its flaws, but the qualities for this aircraft were very extraordinary for its time, and that is why this plane will forever remain in our hearts.